the subtle storm brewing inside her. She had encountered moments like these before, small, seemingly insignificant gestures that carried weight far beyond the surface. She could have ignored it, dismissed it as a mistake, but something about Clara's demeanor told her otherwise. Instead of reacting immediately, Oprah took a deliberate breath, lifted the plastic lid, and examined the meal in front of her. A stark contrast to the elegantly plated dishes around her, it was a clear message, whether intentional or not. Julian shifted uncomfortably, awaiting her response, but Oprah remained poised, a knowing glint in her eye. As the flight continued, Clara's subtle dismissiveness persisted. Requests were met with cold efficiency, her words clipped and impersonal, her gaze avoiding direct contact. Other passengers seemed oblivious, lost in their own worlds of luxury and comfort. But Oprah saw everything. She always did. Then, as if the universe had orchestrated the perfect moment, an unexpected turbulence shook the cabin. Drinks spilled, conversations paused, and for the first time, Clara's perfectly composed mask slipped. She stumbled slightly, catching herself on the back of a seat, her carefully curated grace momentarily shattered. Oprah watched, waiting. Moments later, as Clara attempted to regain control, she moved towards Oprah's seat once more, this time with an air of forced politeness. "Is everything all right, Miss Winfrey?" she asked, her voice carefully measured. Oprah met her gaze with warmth, genuine, yet firm. "You know," she said, her voice carrying the weight of experience, "how we treat people when we think no one's watching says more about us than anything else." For the first time since the flight began, Clara hesitated. A flicker of realization crossed her face, like a shadow passing over the sun. Oprah didn't need to say more. The message had been delivered, and its impact was unmistakable. By the time the plane landed, word had already begun to spread among the crew and passengers. Not because Oprah had made a scene, not because she had demanded an apology, but because of the way she had handled it, with grace, wisdom, and an unshakable sense of self-worth. And just like that, a lesson had been taught, not through anger, but through presence. Because that's who Oprah Winfrey was. And always would be. Subscribe to the channel and let me know, where are you watching this from? People, but it never ceased to amaze her how it could manifest in the most unexpected places, even in the controlled, polished environment of first-class air travel. She wasn't one to jump to conclusions, but the pattern was clear. Clara wasn't just being strict, she was making a point. Oprah exhaled slowly, pressing her fingertips against the open pages of her notebook. She had a choice. She could let it slide, ignore the microaggressions, and continue her flight in silence, or she could address it in the way she knew best, with grace, composure, and an unwavering sense of self-worth. Julian, seated a row behind, leaned in again. "Do you want me to say something?" he whispered, his voice laced with concern. Oprah shook her head, offering him a reassuring glance. "No need," she murmured. "Some battles are won without a single word." And with that, she returned to her notebook, her pen moving across the page with renewed purpose. If Clara was expecting a reaction, she wouldn't get the one she wanted. Instead, Oprah did what she had done her entire life. She took the moment, the tension, the subtle injustice, and turned it into something greater. By the time the turbulence passed and the cabin returned to its previous calm, something had shifted. Other passengers, once passive observers, were now exchanging knowing glances. A silent understanding had settled over the space. They had seen it too. And just as Oprah had predicted, the storm had passed. But its impact would linger far longer than Clara had anticipated. Because sometimes, the most powerful response isn't outrage. It's the quiet, undeniable presence of someone who refuses to be diminished. Reading the words carefully as if they might reveal more upon a second glance. "Be careful. I heard them talking about you. Something's not right." The message was vague but urgent, and that alone was enough to put her on high alert. She had spent her life trusting her instincts, and right now, they were telling her that this wasn't just paranoia. Clara's behavior, the whispered conversations, the unease of the other crew member, it was all connected. But to what? Oprah glanced around the dimly lit cabin. Most passengers were asleep or lost in their own worlds, unaware of the silent tension unfolding around them. The elderly man across the aisle had dozed off, his book resting on his chest. A soft murmur of an in-flight movie played from a nearby seat. Everything looked normal. Too normal. Just then, movement caught her eye. Clara reappeared at the far end of the cabin, standing just outside the galley. She wasn't moving, just watching. Her eyes locked onto Oprah's for a brief second before she turned away, disappearing once more. Oprah exhaled slowly, folding the note and tucking it into her notebook. All right, she thought. If they want to play games, let's see how far they're willing to go. She reached for the call button, pressing it firmly. A moment later, a different flight attendant arrived, a young man with soft brown eyes and an air of nervous professionalism. "Miss Winfrey, how can I assist you?" Oprah offered a polite smile. "I'd like to speak with the lead flight attendant." The young man hesitated. That would be Clara, ma'am." "Perfect," Oprah said smoothly, closing her notebook. "Please let her know I'd like a word." The attendant nodded and disappeared toward the galley. Julian, watching from his seat, raised an eyebrow in silent question. Oprah simply gave him a knowing glance. A minute later, Clara returned. Her face was composed, but there was something in her eyes, something guarded. "Miss Winfrey," she said, her tone perfectly neutral. "Is there something I can assist you with?" Oprah studied her carefully, then leaned forward just slightly. "You tell me." A flicker of something, fear, perhaps, crossed Clara's face before she recovered. "I'm not sure I understand." Oprah smiled, the kind of smile that carried weight without needing force. "Oh, I think you do." For the first time, Clara faltered. A single bead of sweat at her temple. A slight shift of her stance. Oprah held her gaze, unwavering. "Here's the thing," she continued, her voice calm but firm. "I don't know what game you think you're playing, but I promise you, you won't win." A silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken meaning. Then, Clara did something unexpected. She swallowed hard, then turned on her heel and walked away. Julian leaned forward immediately. "What was that?" Oprah tapped a finger against her notebook, her mind already working through the possibilities. "I don't know yet," she admitted, watching as Clara disappeared once more. "But I intend to find out." And just like that, the flight took a turn Oprah never saw coming. Concern. Oprah gave her a barely perceptible nod, a silent acknowledgement of the risk she had taken. She exhaled slowly, shifting her focus back to the reality of the moment. The tension had transformed from a lingering unease into something far more tangible. Clara's hushed conversations, the cryptic warnings, the uncomfortable glances exchanged between crew members, it all pointed to a plan unfolding right in front of her. And somehow, she was at the center of it. Her fingers tightened around the edges of her notebook. She had faced adversity before, countless times, and had always come out stronger. But this was different. This wasn't an interview gone wrong or a media smear campaign. This was something happening in real time, behind closed doors, 30,000 feet above the ground. Julian leaned toward her, his voice barely above a whisper. "Something's up. I can feel it. You want me to ask around?" Oprah shook her head slightly. "Not yet. We don't tip them off. Not until we know exactly what we're dealing with." But even as she said it, she could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on her. This wasn't paranoia. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a setup. She cast another glance toward the galley, where Clara had disappeared. The flight attendant had been careful, calculating, making sure to mask her actions just enough to avoid immediate suspicion. But now, Oprah had the upper hand. She knew something was happening. The question was, what were they waiting for? Just then, a soft chime echoed through the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen," the captain's voice crackled over the intercom. "We've just been informed of a slight delay in our landing sequence. Nothing to worry about, Just some unexpected traffic in our destination airspace. We appreciate your patience. A delay. Oprah's pulse quickened. Coincidence? Maybe. But in her experience, coincidence rarely meant nothing. She turned to Julian, lowering her voice. Something's about to happen. Stay alert. He nodded, slipping his tablet into his bag. Got it. As the minutes stretched on, the quiet hum of the cabin felt almost deceptive. Sleepy passengers, gentle turbulence, the faint clink of glassware from the galley, it was all too normal. And then, out of the corner of her eye, she saw Clara move. Not toward the galley. Not toward another passenger. But toward the cockpit. Oprah's breath caught in her throat. This flight wasn't just a flight anymore. It was a trap. Deepening as the aircraft adjusted its course. Outside the window, the distant glow of city lights flickered against the dark horizon, signaling that they were nearing the unscheduled landing site. Oprah sat still, her hands folded neatly in her lap, her face composed, but her mind was racing. Everything about this situation screamed manipulation. The technical issue. The insistence on her disembarking alone. Clara's thinly veiled hostility. It was all too precise, too intentional. Someone was orchestrating this, and Oprah intended to find out who. Julian wasn't convinced. He leaned in closer. This doesn't sit right with me. If we land and they try anything, you don't have to go with them. We'll call the authorities, make this public, whatever it takes. Oprah gave him a small, reassuring smile. I appreciate that. But let's not act in fear. We act in truth. He sighed, frustrated but trusting. The plane shuddered slightly as it continued its descent, and the tension in the cabin grew thicker. Passengers whispered among themselves, casting worried glances at Oprah, at Clara, at each other. The elderly man across the aisle cleared his throat, looking directly at Oprah. If you need support, young lady, you have it, he said simply. The young woman who had slipped her the note nodded as well. You're not alone. A quiet ripple of solidarity spread through the cabin. People Oprah had never met, strangers who had nothing to gain, were stepping up. And that, more than anything, told her she wasn't just imagining things. The seatbelt sign dinged, signaling final approach. A smooth but firm voice came over the intercom. Cabin crew, prepare for landing. Clara walked briskly down the aisle, checking seatbelts, her eyes avoiding Oprah's. But Oprah didn't need her attention. She already knew the truth. This wasn't just a flight anymore. It was a test. And Oprah Winfrey had never failed a test in her life. As the wheels touched down, sending a soft jolt through the aircraft, she exhaled slowly. The real confrontation was about to begin. Terminal, her fingers tightening around the strap of her bag. Something's off, she murmured, her voice just above a whisper. Oprah nodded, her eyes scanning the room. The dim lighting, the abandoned feel of the terminal, the fact that no other staff members had appeared, it was all wrong. She had traveled enough to know what an emergency landing looked like. This wasn't it. Lila shifted in her seat, lowering her voice further. I don't think this is just about you being on that flight. I think it's bigger than that. Oprah turned to her, her expression calm but serious. Tell me everything you heard. Lila exhaled sharply, glancing toward the entrance as if expecting someone to walk in. It was just bits and pieces, but Clara, she wasn't acting alone. When I went to the restroom earlier, I overheard her talking on the phone. She said something about how this needs to be handled before we land. I didn't think much of it at first, but then I started paying attention. The way the other flight attendants were acting, the way they were watching you, she shook her head. This wasn't random. Oprah absorbed her words, her mind processing every detail. If what Lila was saying was true, then whoever was behind this had planned for her removal before the plane had even touched down. A sharp gust of wind rattled the windows, and Oprah glanced outside, her instincts on high alert. The aircraft was still parked on the tarmac, but something had changed. Two figures stood at the bottom of the stairway leading to the jet, men dressed in dark suits, their postures rigid, their gazes fixed on the terminal. Lila followed her line of sight and stiffened. Who are they? Oprah's jaw tightened. That's what I intend to find out. Before she could stand, the airport employee from earlier reappeared, his face tense. Miss Winfrey, he said, his voice edged with discomfort, we need you to come with us. Us. A second man stepped into view from the hallway behind him, tall, broad-shouldered, and wearing the same impassive expression as the suited figures outside. Lila instinctively reached for Oprah's arm. Don't go with them alone, she whispered urgently. Oprah met the man's eyes, reading him carefully. She had spent a lifetime mastering the art of assessing people in an instant. This man wasn't just airport staff. She stood slowly, exuding the same calm authority that had carried her through countless high-pressure situations. I'd like to know who I'm speaking with first. The man hesitated for a fraction of a second before responding. We're with airport security. A lie. Oprah held his gaze, unflinching. Then show me some credentials. Silence. The room felt heavier. The men outside were moving now, making their way toward the entrance. Lila's grip on her bag tightened. Oprah exhaled slowly, straightening her shoulders. I think we're done here, she said, her voice steady. And unless you have a lawful reason to detain me, I'm walking out of this terminal. The man hesitated, but before he could respond, a loud chime echoed through the room. Oprah's phone. She glanced down at the screen. Signal restored. And just like that, the tide shifted. She turned the phone toward the man, her fingers hovering over the screen. I suggest you step aside, she said smoothly. Because in exactly 5 seconds, I'll be making a very public call. The man stiffened. The suited figures outside hesitated. A beat passed. Then another. And without another word, the man stepped back. Lila let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Oprah gave him one last look before walking toward the exit, her pace measured, her presence undeniable. As she stepped out into the night air, she didn't look back. The storm had come and gone. And once again, Oprah Winfrey had walked straight through it. Subscribe to the channel and tell me, where are you watching from? Oprah offered the woman a warm smile, the kind that had reassured millions over the years. Thank you, she said gently. Right now, we just need a little privacy and a place to think. The manager nodded quickly. Of course, I'll have your rooms prepared immediately. If you need anything, security, press management, even just a quiet space, it's yours. Julian exchanged a glance with Oprah. Even here, miles from where it all began, people understood the weight of what was happening. This wasn't just another controversy, it was a moment. And moments like this had the power to change everything. As they settled into their temporary headquarters, Julian wasted no time setting up calls. Lila scrolled through her phone, tracking the conversation online. The airlines issued a statement, she announced. They're calling it a misunderstanding, saying the flight crew acted in the interest of passenger safety. Oprah exhaled, shaking her head. Predictable, she murmured. Julian didn't look up from his laptop. We need to respond before they control the narrative. Oprah leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms. We will. But not with anger. With truth. Lila hesitated before speaking again. People are asking if you're going to go on the record, an interview, a live statement, something direct. Oprah considered this. She knew the power of her voice. But she also knew when to wield it strategically. Then, her phone buzzed. A familiar name lit up the screen, a journalist she trusted, someone who had built a career on exposing hard truths. Oprah met Julian's gaze and gave a small nod before answering. Let's talk, she said. And just like that, the next chapter of the fight began. The city skyline, Oprah felt the weight of the moment settle over her. The fight was far from over, but the tide had shifted. What started as a single act of mistreatment had ignited something much larger, a reckoning that was rippling across industries, conversations, and policies. Julian stepped out onto the balcony beside her, his phone still buzzing with notifications. "The airline is scrambling," he said, scrolling through messages. "They're offering private settlements to some of the passengers who spoke out, trying to contain the damage." Oprah sighed, shaking her head. "They still don't get it. This isn't just about making it go away. It's about making it right." Lila appeared in the doorway, holding her laptop. "You need to see this," she said, her voice tinged with urgency. She placed the laptop on the balcony table, turning the screen toward them. A new headline flashed across the screen. "Ex-employees speak out, airline's pattern of discrimination exposed." Below it, testimonies from former flight attendants and ground crew painted a damning picture, incidents eerily similar to what Oprah had experienced, swept under the rug time and time again. Julian let out a low whistle. This just turned into something much bigger. Oprah read through the article, her expression steady but unreadable. Then, she closed the laptop and looked at them both. "This is what happens when you shine a light in the dark," she said simply. The night air was cool against her skin, but inside, a fire burned. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for every person who had ever been told to sit down, stay silent, and accept injustice as the cost of moving through the world. And she had no intention of stopping. Only if we stay relentless. This can't be just another headline that fades away after a news cycle. We need real, measurable change. Sarah nodded, determination evident in her eyes. "Then let's make sure it happens. I'll coordinate with your legal team. If the airline thinks they can smooth this over with a weak apology, they're about to find out otherwise." As the call ended, Julian turned to Oprah. "We're gaining ground. Public sentiment is overwhelmingly on our side, and now we have legal backing to push this further." Lila scrolled through her phone, shaking her head in disbelief. "The airline is still trying to downplay it. They're saying you misunderstood Clara's actions. That it was a miscommunication." Oprah's lips pressed into a firm line. Classic deflection. They're hoping to confuse the narrative, but the truth is too clear now. Julian set his tablet down. "So what's next?" "The initiative is launched, the complaint is filed, the media is on fire. What's our next move?" Oprah exhaled, standing by the window, looking out at the city once more. "We take it higher." She turned back to them, her voice resolute. "We don't just fight this in the court of public opinion. We bring this to lawmakers, to regulators, to every corner of the industry that has allowed this to continue. We push for policies, for real oversight. We make sure that no one has to go through this again." Lila smiled. "Then let's get to work." And just like that, the movement expanded beyond the walls of their temporary headquarters. What had begun as a single flight had now become a battle for justice on a global scale. The pressure mounted. Airlines scrambled to respond. Legislators took notice. Change wasn't just coming. It had already begun. The cool evening air wrapped around Oprah as she stood on the balcony of her home, the distant hum of the city blending with the quiet rustling of leaves. The skyline stretched endlessly before her, a sea of twinkling lights mirroring the stars above. In that moment, she wasn't just looking at the horizon, she was looking at the future. This was more than reflection. More than a sigh of relief after a battle well fought. This was a declaration, a quiet but unshakable vow that the fight for justice would not end with one policy shift or a single airline's apology. It would not be wrapped up neatly in a press conference or dissolved into the background noise of fleeting news cycles. It was something bigger now, something unstoppable. What began as a single moment of mistreatment on a flight had ignited a conversation that could no longer be ignored. From viral hashtags to legislative hearings, from whispered concerns to voices raised in unity, the movement had grown beyond even what she had imagined. It was no longer just about her experience, it was about every person who had been made to feel small, unheard, or unwelcome. Oprah took a slow, deep breath, letting the weight of it all settle in. She thought of Asha's email, of the elderly man on the plane, of Lila's courage and Julian's relentless drive. She thought of the countless stories that had emerged, of the people who had come forward not just to support her, but to claim their own justice. Change, she realized, is not some distant dream. It's not something we wait for. It's something we create, brick by brick, voice by voice. And when people come together, when they refuse to back down, refuse to be silenced, change is not just possible. It's inevitable. A small, determined smile crossed her lips as she turned from the balcony, stepping back inside. There was still work to be done. There were still conversations to be had, policies to be challenged, minds to be opened. The fight was far from over. But one thing was clear. The sky has no limits. And neither does the fight for dignity, respect, and equality.